Today's episode of Transformers Prime is a strange beast, and not just because it's our first real look at what the beastly creature that Shockwave brought back from Cybertron can do. I don't remember this part of the show super well. I've said that a couple of times. And part of that is because at this point, the show started to disappoint me. More than not, even though it was still perfectly fine, it started to disappoint me with what storylines it took in what directions. And so between that and the fact that these episodes were ones that didn't get rerun as often because they were newer, we're coming up on the final season of the show. Well, we're on the final, you get what I'm saying. We're coming up on the final episodes of this series at this point. We would have been getting these new episodes while we were still getting episodes of earlier seasons as repeats. But this episode, rewatching it, so much kept flooding back to me. A lot of the images and memories of this particular little arc that I've been remembering as I've been rewatching parts of it came from this episode specifically. And I actually really vividly remember my initial response to this episode when I watched it the first time live. Because this episode, for what it does just within the confines of itself, is absolutely excellent. It takes all of the plot threads that have been building during this little premiere arc, and it weaves them together flawlessly. It doesn't resolve them, because it just it passes some of them back down the field, and even threads some more. But it brings so many of them together and seems to be setting them on a very specific and interesting path. I've mentioned several times since Smokescreen showed up on the show that his arc seemed to be sort of a redo of the arc of Hot Rod, as we saw in the Transformers the movie, the original Transformers animated movie. And this episode seemed to be weaving the arcs of this show into a full redo of some of the character arcs in that movie, giving us a more mature, more complete, and more earned version of some of the outcomes that we saw in that film. And I will spoil the series this much for you right now. That doesn't end up happening, and I'm going to talk about that more as this review goes on. But seeing that stuff happen in this episode and seeing it seem to be leading to that thing, I got so excited. Because I don't dislike that movie or anything. It's perfectly fine. But I have issues with it. The stuff that happens in it happens a little quick. A lot of the characters come out of nowhere. And in the subsequent third season of the original show that follows it, the character that they really lifted up, Rodimus Prime, the character that they seem to be building Smokescreen up to becoming a version of, was kind of a disappointment. The writing for him was pretty bad. He ended up being a very inactive leader, someone who second-guessed himself. He didn't take charge very well. He made stupid decisions. He acted brash. And yeah, this was a show that didn't really have much episode-to-episode continuity aside from sometimes which characters were around and like what the general mission statement of the good guys and bad guys were. So that was to be expected. But Optimus always seemed larger than life. Even when he was making decisions that in hindsight were kind of stupid and only existed to serve the plot, the episode still treated him like he was making the right choices. It almost tore down Rodimus. It treated him pretty badly. The show itself treated him pretty badly, like he was some kind of fool/lackluster replacement for the objectively superior Optimus, who, like, even then, the Matrix was a thing that was supposed to have all of this power and wisdom within it. He shouldn't have been that way. And seeing that done over again right is exciting. Because it's a cool concept. Seeing the heroic, larger-than-life, almost Superman-esque leader of this ragtag team you've been following replaced by somebody else who, despite having all this wisdom, has to learn how to properly use it. In a show with real continuity and good writing, that's such a cool idea. And so the way this episode ends, suggesting that that's going to happen, and that they're just gonna straight up do stuff from the movie over again, but like with arcs in a show with episodes. It was just such a cool feeling. And then it doesn't happen. But still, the build-up to it not happening, this episode itself, is good. But it was building up to something that never happened. Except that it kind of did, and I'll talk about that later too. So how do I rate this episode? Is this a good episode or is it not a good episode? Like, I absolutely love how we check in with everybody, and a little bit, at least, happens with everybody. Every little group, the Decepticons as a whole, in each little group of Autobots, they all progress towards the goals that they're trying to achieve right now in this episode. And it's really cool to see it because it all happens so succinctly, and so much of it does weave together into now just one plot line that it feels satisfying without actually resolving anything. It's very expertly done. Like, they send out the beast that Shockwave brought back, Predaking, to hunt down Wheeljack because they have a sample of specifically his energon from the interrogation. Meanwhile, Wheeljack and Bulkhead, and Miko too, but not really, are wiring up an old energon mine the Decepticons made to explode, which will be a really frickin' big explosion because of all the raw energon in it, in the hopes that the other Autobots will see it and now find them. And Raph, Ratchet, and Bumblebee are trying to get communications working on the Harbinger. They can't get it working with Autobot signals yet, but they can at least use the Decepticon signals, which the Decepticons might not be monitoring very closely anyway right now, and so they should be able to communicate with at least some people. Jack and RC have also hooked up now with Ultra Magnus, who, despite being a very by-the-books kind of douchey guy, somebody who we don't really want to see take charge because he's kind of a douche, is here and willing and able to take charge, and this version of Ultra Magnus was very explicitly trained by Optimus Prime. And he has a scanner that can actually specifically detect Autobot life signals, so he can find the others, and he has a ship. And finally, Smokescreen has made it into Darkmount and found the Forge. He is seemingly going to be able to return it to Optimus so that Optimus can fix himself. But at the same time, there's a little bit of tension, because Magnus says that he's able to detect 5 Autobot life signals when there should be 7. But we're told that shielded signals can't be detected. So, is he not detecting the buried Optimus and the phase-shifted Smokescreen? Or is he not detecting Ratchet and Bumblebee? Is the Harbinger shielding them? Because if it's the latter, then that means Optimus is still definitely alive. But if not, if he's detecting Ratchet and Bumblebee, then Optimus may have already died in the time that it's taken Smokescreen to get into Darkmount. And we have a oh no moment later in the episode when Magnus tracks Ratchet and Bumblebee to the Harbinger and rendezvous with them. Because that means Optimus could be dead already at this point. And Optimus is a character who dies so often throughout this franchise that it genuinely wouldn't be surprising if he was. We also, in this episode, before it ends, get to see the first couple of skirmishes with Predaking. He ends up finding Wheeljack and Bulkhead before they blow that mine, and he engages with them. They fight him directly, and they don't leave a scratch. They hit him with a bomb, and he's fine. They even managed to lure him into that mine they were going to blow up, and then blow it up. And he just gets back up and dusts himself off. And this is all before he's even gone into a robot mode. This is just his alt mode. It takes the weaponry on Magnus's ship, plus Magnus's expert piloting, to even shake him off long enough for them to regroup. This thing is genuinely dangerous, and it's not going to stay injured enough to stop chasing them for very long. And then you have Magnus stepping up and taking charge, which is something that happened in that movie. He was given command by Optimus because Optimus didn't have a better pick for the next Prime yet when he died in that movie. Only for the leadership to be turned over to Rodimus later, when he turned out to be the one capable of opening the Matrix and becoming a new Prime by bathing in the light of the Matrix. And so when, at the end of the episode, Optimus says, the Forge is going to run out of power eventually, and they need to save it to rebuild the Omega Lock. That's why he has Smokescreen get it, and he plans to make Smokescreen the next Prime. You really get the sense that they're planning to do some version of that story from the movie in the rest of this season of the show. That Optimus is going to die, and either Smokescreen is going to take the Matrix and not be able to open it yet, and have to go on an arc to reach a point where he can and become the leader Optimus wants him to be. Or he's going to open the Matrix, become a Prime, but be shitty at it like Rodimus Prime was in Season 3 of the original show, and have to go through an arc to become a better leader. Or he's going to take it, give it to Magnus. Magnus isn't going to be able to open it, but then later on Smokescreen will come into his own and open it like Rodimus did in the movie. Or something along those lines. And yeah, I don't want Optimus to die, and yeah, I would want them to bring him back somehow, because that's another thing that Optimus does. He comes back to life after he dies. In fact, the Transformers animated Optimus Prime died and then was resurrected within 3 minutes of each other. It's absolutely hilarious. In I think the first episode of that show. Again, hilarious. But have him come back later on in the New Heroes arc as kind of a reward for him completing the arc and finding his true sense of self. And then they can share responsibilities for leading the team. But that's not what happens. I do remember enough of this season to know that that's not what happens. And that in fact, after building Smokescreen up for this long, making him the backbone of this latest arc of the show, they instead basically do that, but with Bumblebee in this show's sequel, R.I.D. In fact, that's one of the many baffling creative choices that they made when putting R.I.D. together that make it really hard for me to watch it. I still haven't finished that show because I keep being what were you thinking? It would have made so much more sense to do this same thing but with these other people. And it bugs the crap out of me. It feels like, and maybe I'm misremembering, and I hope I am, but it feels like, looking back on this character of Smokescreen, that he was just a huge waste. But even beyond that, I almost feel the same way about Jack. Remember when they were building him up to be a worthwhile leader? And then he just kind of fell into the background? The show acknowledges him. He had speaking lines in this episode. Stuff happened with him in this episode. He reunites with his mom after Ratchet sends the location of the Harbinger to Fowler so that he can rendezvous with him, and he brings her with him. But Jack hasn't progressed in his arc at all, even though early on in Smokescreen's arc, it seemed like their arcs were going to happen in parallel with each other. Just nothing else has happened. And I think that's one of my main issues with this show. It is still a quality show. I cannot stress that enough. Even with all of the weaknesses that I've pointed out in it, not just today, but in many past reviews in this review series, it's still a quality show, but they just abandon story arcs so often. And I don't know if that's because of behind-the-scenes stuff or not, but they should have done better. Regardless of the reason, they should have done better. Because this show is already really good, but it could have been an absolute masterpiece if they had just stuck some of these landings harder. Again, I hope I'm misremembering and that there's more to this than I think there is. We'll see. We'll see as we continue through this season. But I really do kind of get the sense that I'm going to walk away from this review series disappointed. And that it's never a fun way to feel, right? All of that said, what do you guys think of the Transformers Prime episode Prey? Did I give the title of it yet? I don't remember if I did or not. The episode title is Prey, in case I haven't said that yet. Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else who think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description, but either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.